Fintan, it's 3 years since the Brexit vote practically. Today was to have been so-called Independence Day. We're nowhere. How has democracy failed in this instance?
Well, democracy is about informed consent. If you go to the doctor and the doctor recommends something, they need to tell you what exactly it is and what the consequences are. And unfortunately for people in Britain, they were never given the right to informed consent. I mean, they were told that Brexit was going to be the easiest deal that would ever be negotiated, that it would be all over in a year and it would be just fantastic, and that they would have all the benefits of EU membership without any of the costs. It was a fantasy, and therefore it just simply could not survive contact with reality. And what we're seeing now is the playing out of this, really, that something that was impossible has just gone round and round in circles. And it's caused enormous damage, I think, to Britain itself in the process.
We've been talking a lot this week about existential crises, and we had a member of Parliament on yesterday who said, look, Parliament does not reflect the people right now, and that's part of the problem. What special circumstances have given rise to this?
So I think the underlying problems are that there's a problem with the union itself. The Europeans have been complaining for the last 2.5 years that the British aren't negotiating with them, they're negotiating with themselves. And in a way, that's the reality that people won't face. That really, this is a country which is very, very uncomfortable with itself. You have Scottish nationalism, you have the Irish problem, and then what we've really had really since the turn of the century is the rise of an English nationalism that nobody has really been talking about or addressing. And the only chance people in England really got to express their anger with the way they're governed and their sense that we don't really fully believe that we belong here or that people are speaking for us was the Brexit referendum. But it's a real exercise in displacement. So it's not really fundamentally about the European Union. It's really about the British themselves, and in particular the English themselves, who are the people who actually voted for Brexit.
Fintan, as you say, this is political in so many ways, what has been going on here in the UK. The EU has gone about it in a very bureaucratic way, and in some ways they've been talking across each other as a result of which. Do you think there is some responsibility that lies on the other side of the channel? Is there some responsibility in Brussels in the way that this has been approached in a very rules-based way?
Yeah, it's a great question, but I think if anybody understands the European Union at all, they understand that it's just a set of rules. I mean, its whole existence is about the fact that it's a rule-bound organisation. And I think the British misunderstood that. They thought that they could split off one country from another. They could play the French against the Germans. They could play everybody against little Ireland. And that just didn't work. And yes, I think you can absolutely say that there's been a certain inflexibility on the European side. But I think this should have been very predictable. That's the way the European Union works. Once it decided on its negotiating strategy, it really couldn't open it up again, because then you're into a nightmare. You've got 27 different countries. Everybody has different interests. In a sense, it was predictable that they would stick together. Part of the problem, I think, for the Brexiteers is they didn't really believe the deal would ultimately be done in Brussels. They believed it would be done in Berlin. They had a kind of fantasy that the European Union is really just the Germans. David Davis, who was the Brexit secretary originally, said, this deal will be done in Berlin. It'll be done in the last week. It'll just be, us and the Germans. We'll all sort this out. And that was just simply untrue and I think a misunderstanding of the way the European Union would work.
Can I ask you how you think Ireland's relationship with the EU is going to change as a result of what has happened in this 2.5-year process? As you say, the EU has stuck together, and the EU has stood behind Ireland, has stood behind Dublin. And I'm just kind of wondering, as a result of that very strong support, how the nature of the relationship is going to change going forward from here. Ireland is now embedded firmly in Brussels, like it always was, but it is more so now.
I think that's absolutely right, Guy. I think that's a really good point, and it's a very profound one for us in Ireland. In a way, in Ireland, we've, like most small countries, we've always kind of ridden two horses at the same time. So we've had this very close relationship with Britain. Our histories are completely intertwined and will remain so. Geography is destiny. We're not going to sail off closer to France. We're still part of this archipelago together. But at the same time, I think absolutely, as you say, what Brexit's kind of force is Ireland has sort of psychologically had to move further towards the continent. And I don't think Irish people have really fully thought through what the consequences of that long term are. Do we become more European? What are the implications of that, for example, for Ireland's corporate tax policy, which is seen by a lot of the Europeans as being a very damaging one? So yes, Ireland's been, for the first time, what we've had in the last 2.5 years is that Ireland has been more powerful than Britain. That's never ever happened before in the entire history of relationships between these two islands, but it's been powerful simply because it's been part of the 27. And that has paid off in one way, in that Irish demands have been absolutely at the centre of what the Europeans have been pushing, and that's what's led us towards the backstop and towards what's happening today. But on the other hand, the long-term relationships between Ireland and Britain, not least because of the peace process in Northern Ireland, but also economically, culturally, socially, these are crucial relationships to us in Ireland. And we haven't really thought through, what's on the other side of this mess. And this is why I think Irish people are desperately hoping somehow that there is an amicable solution to this. The Irish don't want the backstop to be used to punish the British.
Right, and there was a great headline, come on Arlene, that was one of the sort of the funnier headlines of the week, but the DUP was put into an extraordinary role, Fintan, in all of this. Explain how that relationship moves forward.
Yeah, so I mean, history is a pretty can be a real joker at times, and to throw into all of this crisis, the 2017 election that Theresa May called, leading to this very small kind of, in British terms, marginal Irish party having the balance of power, the DUP, with their 10 MPs. They don't really represent Northern Ireland. They only represent about a third of people in Northern Ireland, but they have been the voice of a certain kind of Irish unionism within this whole process. And I think they themselves have not really understood what the long-term consequences of this are. They allied themselves very strongly with the hard Brexiteers, with the Boris Johnsons, the Jacob Rees-Moggs. And what's been happening in the last 2 days is very interesting. The Boris Johnsons and Rees-Moggs are moving away from the DUP. I think they were always going to be betrayed in the end, because in the end, Brexit is about England, and it's about England's sense of itself. And they may, they like the union, they talk about it and all that sort of stuff. But for them, Brexit's more important in the long term than the union is. Whereas for the DUP, the union's much more important than Brexit. And so I think they've become more isolated. They're probably going to end up being blamed by a lot of English people for this mess, which is a bit unfair. I mean, there's a lot of other contributory factors. But I think it leaves the whole future of the union, the future of Irish unionism and people who want to maintain the link with Britain in very serious flux and very serious doubt. And that's one of the things about the Brexit process, that it's had all these unintended consequences that nobody really thought about at the time.
Well, and you make the point that right now people in Northern Ireland can choose to be Irish, they can choose to be British, or they can choose to be both. And it's been a very multi-layered, sort of society where everyone has been pretty happy since the Good Friday Agreement, and that's all in jeopardy, along with twice as many border points on, between Northern Ireland and Ireland as there are on the other side of Europe.
Yeah, I try to explain this to people, well, they say, oh, it's just a little border in a small island. But, if you think about the entire eastern flank of the European Union has 137 crossing points. The Irish border has about 300. It's an impossible border. It was never meant to be an international frontier. And to make it a huge frontier between the European Union and Britain really does disturb the kind of slow peace process that's been going on really now for 20 years, which has been very, very positive. The border has more or less disappeared, right? So if I travel between Dublin and Belfast, I can't remember where the border used to be. If you put that back up there and if you make it a big physical presence, it really very deeply disturbs people's sense that actually they could just get on with life and not have to think about whether they're Irish or British, just live together. That's what most people want to do, and it's why Brexit, I think, has been so damaging.